The blizzard had turned Boston into a frozen tomb, and Sarah Miller knew she had maybe an hour left before hypothermia claimed all four of them. Her three children, Emma, Sophie, and little Jake, had stopped shivering 20 minutes ago, their lips blue, their small bodies pressed against hers for warmth that no longer existed. Then, through the white-out snow, headlights pierced the darkness, and a man in a $1,000 coat stepped out into the storm, looked directly at her with eyes that had seen too much, and said four words that would shatter everything she thought she knew about mercy: "Come with me." Welcome to Stories by Jason. If you're settled in and ready for a good story, hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I've got another exciting story coming your way tomorrow, and trust me, you don't want to miss it. Thank you so much for the love and support. You're truly appreciated, and I'm so grateful to have you here with me. The wind didn't howl, it screamed. Sarah Miller pressed her back against the brick wall of the abandoned storefront on Boylston Street, trying to create some barrier between her children and the blizzard that was actively trying to kill them. The weather reports had called it historic, catastrophic, life-threatening. They'd urged everyone to stay indoors, to seek shelter, to avoid travel at all costs. But what did you do when you had no indoors to stay in? When every shelter in Boston had turned you away because they were already over capacity? When the temperature had dropped to -15 degrees, and the wind chill made it feel like -40? You died. That was the simple truth Sarah had accepted about an hour ago, when Emma had stopped asking when they could go somewhere warm. Her 7-year-old daughter had just gone quiet, her small body trembling less and less as hypothermia began its cruel work. 5-year-old Sophie was pressed against Sarah's chest, her breathing so shallow it barely fogged the air. And Jake, Jake, her 3-year-old son had gone completely limp 20 minutes ago, his lips a terrifying shade of blue. Sarah's own fingers had lost feeling an hour before that. Her toes might as well not exist. She could feel her thoughts slowing down, her brain struggling to function as her core temperature dropped. She knew what was happening. She'd been a nurse once, in another life, before everything fell apart. She knew the stages of hypothermia. She knew they were in the final one. "Mommy." Emma's voice was barely a whisper, almost lost in the wind. "I'm tired." "I know, baby," Sarah managed, her lips so cold the words came out slurred. Just stay awake a little longer." What? The cruel thought pierced through her fading consciousness. Why should they stay awake? So they could suffer more? So they could feel the moment their hearts stopped? 6 months. That's how long it had been since Sarah's world had imploded. 6 months since her husband Richard died suddenly of a brain aneurysm, leaving her reeling with grief. 6 months since Richard's family, the wealthy, powerful Millers of Beacon Hill, had descended on her like vultures, revealing that Richard had never actually put her name on the house deed, had never updated his will after they married, had never legally protected her in any way. 6 months since Richard's brother Thomas and his wife Patricia had smiled at her across a conference table and explained, with lawyer-perfect precision, that she had no legal claim to anything. Not the house. Not the bank accounts. Not even Richard's life insurance policy, which had his mother listed as the sole beneficiary from before the marriage. "Of course, we'll give you time to make arrangements," Patricia had said, her diamond earrings catching the light. "We're not monsters. You have 30 days to vacate the property." Sarah had tried to fight, had hired a lawyer with money she didn't have, only to learn that Massachusetts estate law was ironclad. Without documentation, without her name on anything, she was legally entitled to nothing. Richard's family had offered her $10,000 as a gesture of goodwill. $10,000 in exchange for her entire life. She'd refused out of pride, out of rage, out of the desperate hope that somehow justice would prevail. That had been a mistake. Within 2 months, she'd burned through her savings. Within 3, she and the children were living in her car. Within 4, the car had been repossessed. For the past 2 months, they'd been on the streets, moving between shelters when space was available, sleeping in bus stations and hospital waiting rooms when it wasn't, surviving on food stamps and the kindness of strangers that was increasingly rare as Boston's homeless population swelled and compassion fatigued. Sarah had tried to shield the children from the worst of it. Had tried to make it an adventure, had told them stories about pioneers and explorers living without houses. But you couldn't make hypothermia an adventure. You couldn't storytell your way out of freezing to death. "I'm sorry," Sarah whispered to her children, tears freezing on her cheeks. "I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you." This wasn't how it was supposed to end. She'd been a good person. She'd followed the rules, worked hard, loved deeply. She'd been a nurse, for God's sake. She'd spent years helping others, saving lives. And this was her reward? Dying on a sidewalk with her babies, invisible to a world that had stopped seeing her the moment she became homeless? Through the white-out conditions, Sarah could barely see 5 feet in front of her. The street was empty, anyone with sense was inside. She couldn't even hear traffic anymore. The city had shut down. It was just them and the storm. Emma's shivering had stopped completely now. That was bad. That was the final stage. When the body stopped trying to warm itself because it was conserving energy for the vital organs. Preparing for the end. Sarah closed her eyes. Maybe it was better this way. Maybe it would be gentle, like falling asleep. Maybe. Light pierced through her eyelids. Sarah forced her eyes open, confused. Headlights. A vehicle had stopped on the street, its high beams cutting through the blizzard like searchlights. Through the falling snow, she could make out the shape of a large black Mercedes, the kind of armored luxury vehicle that cost more than most houses. Hope flickered in her chest. Maybe someone was checking on them, maybe they'd call for help, but past experience had taught her that hope was dangerous. She'd watched dozens of people walk past them over the past months, averting their eyes, pretending not to see. The wealthy were the worst. They'd cross the street to avoid her, clutch their bags tighter, look at her children with disgust instead of compassion. The Mercedes door opened. A man stepped out into the blizzard, and Sarah's hypothermia-addled brain struggled to process what she was seeing. He was tall, probably in his mid-40s, wearing an immaculate charcoal suit and a black cashmere overcoat that probably cost more than she'd made in a year as a nurse. His dark hair was touched with silver at the temples, his face all sharp angles and intensity. He looked like money, old money, serious money, the kind of money that owned buildings instead of living in them. He was going to walk past. They always did. Men like that didn't stop for people like her. But he didn't walk past. He walked directly toward them, his expensive leather shoes crunching through snow that was already 6 inches deep and rising. Behind him, she could see a driver still in the vehicle, and another man, security probably, starting to get out. The man stopped 3 feet away, his gray eyes sweeping over her and the children with an intensity that should have felt invasive but somehow didn't. He was assessing them, she realized. Cataloging the situation with the kind of rapid calculation that spoke of someone used to making split-second decisions with million-dollar consequences. "How long have you been out here?" His voice cut through the wind, deep and commanding. Sarah's voice cracked. "Please, if you're going to call the police, just, my children." "How long?" he repeated, more forcefully. 2 hours. Maybe 3. The shelters are full and... He knelt in the snow in front of her, that expensive coat soaking through, his eyes locked on hers with an intensity that made her feel seen for the first time in months. Truly seen. Not looked through, not past, not around, but seen, as if she was a person who mattered. "These children need immediate medical attention," he said, but he wasn't talking to her. He was talking to someone behind him, the security guard, she realized. "Call ahead to Mount Auburn, tell them I'm bringing in a family with severe hypothermia. I want their best pediatrician and a private room ready in 15 minutes. "Sir, the roads," the security guard started. "I don't care about the roads. Make it happen." The man turned back to Sarah, and something in his expression shifted, not softer, exactly, but more human. "My name is Elias Vance. I'm going to get you and your children somewhere warm and safe. But I need you to trust me enough to let me pick you up and carry you to my car. Can you do that?" Sarah's mind was moving too slowly. Elias Vance. That name meant something. She'd heard it before, seen it in newspapers or on TV, but the details wouldn't come. "I can walk," she managed. "No, you can't. You can't feel your legs, can you?" He was right. She couldn't. "My children." "Marcus?" Elias called to his driver, who was already out of the vehicle and moving toward them with the kind of coordinated efficiency that spoke of military training. "You take the 2 younger children. Thomas," that was to the security guard, "you get the older girl. Wrap them in the emergency blankets from the trunk, handle them carefully, their extremities are likely frostbitten." It was happening too fast. These strangers were reaching for her babies, and every maternal instinct screamed at her to fight, to protect, but she couldn't move, couldn't think clearly enough to resist. Elias must have seen the panic in her eyes because he shifted closer, blocking her view of his men taking her children. Careful, so careful, wrapping them in metallic emergency blankets, and focused her attention solely on him. "I understand you're scared," he said quietly, his voice somehow audible despite the wind. "I understand you have no reason to trust me. But your children are dying, and we're wasting time. So I'm going to make you a promise. I will not hurt them. I will not hurt you. I am going to get you somewhere warm, get you medical care, and make sure you survive this night. That's it. No strings, no conditions. You have my word. His eyes held hers, and Sarah found herself believing him. Maybe it was the hypothermia making her judgment clouded. Maybe it was desperation. Or maybe it was something in the way he looked at her, not with pity, but with a fierce determination that suggested he'd made up his mind and God himself couldn't change it. Okay, she whispered. Elias nodded once, then stood and scooped her up as if she weighed nothing. She should have felt embarrassed. She was dirty, she probably smelled, her clothes were falling apart, but his expression never changed. He carried her toward the Mercedes like she was precious cargo, and through her fading consciousness, Sarah caught a glimpse of her children already buckled in the back seat, wrapped in blankets, Marcus and Thomas working to warm their hands and feet carefully. The restaurant called, sir, Marcus said as Elias settled Sarah in the back seat next to her children. They're asking if you're still coming. It's the Mitchell account dinner. Cancel it, Elias said curtly, climbing in beside them as Thomas took the driver's seat and Marcus the passenger side. Sir, this account is worth. I don't care. Cancel it. Tell Mitchell I'll call him tomorrow. Mr. Vance. Thomas. Elias's voice went hard. Drive. Now. The Mercedes surged forward, its all-wheel drive handling the snow-packed streets with ease. Sarah felt warmth, blessed, beautiful warmth, pouring from the heating vents. Sophie stirred in her arms, whimpering. Hospital's only 10 minutes out, sir, Thomas said. But the roads are bad. Might be 15. Then make it 12, Elias replied. He'd pulled out his phone, already making calls. Dr. Patterson? Elias Vance. I need a favor, and I need it now. Sarah let her eyes close, just for a moment. Her children were warm. They were moving toward help. For the first time in 2 months, she felt something she'd almost forgotten existed. And in the back of her mind, even as consciousness started to slip, one question circled. Who was Elias Vance, and why had he stepped out of his perfect life into a blizzard to save 4 strangers he had no reason to care about? Sarah woke to brightness. For a disorienting moment, she thought she'd died, that the brightness was the afterlife or whatever came next. But then pain registered, sharp, burning pain in her fingers and toes as blood flow returned to oxygen-starved tissue. She gasped, trying to sit up, and immediately strong hands pressed her back down. Easy, a woman's voice said, kind, professional. You're safe. You're at Mount Auburn Hospital. I'm Dr. Patterson. You've been unconscious for about 4 hours. Sarah's vision cleared, and she took in her surroundings. She was in a hospital bed in what was definitely not a standard room. This was one of the private suites she'd heard about but never seen during her nursing days, the kind reserved for VIPs and people with excellent insurance. Soft lighting, a real couch instead of those awful plastic chairs, warm wood tones instead of institutional beige. My children, Sarah tried to sit up again, panic flooding through her. Your children are fine, Dr. Patterson said firmly, gently pushing her back again. Emma and Sophie are in the room next door, sleeping. Jake needed a bit more intervention. His core temperature dropped lower than his sister's, but he's stable and resting. All 3 will make full recoveries. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face before she realized she was crying. They're okay? Really? Really? Thanks to whoever got you here when they did. Another 30 minutes. Dr. Patterson trailed off, but the implication was clear. Another 30 minutes and Sarah would have been planning funerals instead of recovery. Can I see them? Soon. First, I need to examine you properly. Dr. Patterson pulled up a chair, her expression shifting from doctor to something more human. You had moderate hypothermia, some frostbite on your fingers and toes. We'll need to watch those carefully, but I think you'll keep everything. You're also significantly malnourished, dehydrated, and showing signs of chronic stress. When did you last have a proper meal? Sarah couldn't remember. I don't know. Few days? And before that? I was making sure the kids ate. They needed it more. Dr. Patterson's expression softened further. You're a good mother, but you can't take care of them if you don't take care of yourself. She paused. The man who brought you in, Mr. Vance, he's been sitting in the waiting room for 4 hours. Hasn't left. He gave his credit card to billing and told them to make sure you and your children have everything you need, no expense spared. He also had his people bring changes of clothes for all of you, food, toiletries. I've never seen anything quite like it. Sarah's memory of the car ride was fragmentary, the warmth, the hushed phone calls, Elias's hand steadying her when she swayed, but she remembered his intensity, that fierce determination. Why? Sarah whispered. Why would he do this? You'd have to ask him. But between you and me? Dr. Patterson leaned closer. I've worked with wealthy donors and philanthropy people for years. Most of them write checks and feel good about themselves from a distance. This is different. He canceled some major business dinner to bring you here personally. He called in favors to get you these rooms. This isn't charity, this is personal, though I couldn't tell you why. Before Sarah could process that, there was a soft knock on the door. That'll be him, Dr. Patterson said. You up for a visitor? Sarah nodded, suddenly self-conscious. She was in a hospital gown, her hair was probably a disaster, she hadn't showered in days. The door opened, and Elias Vance stepped in. He looked different than he had in the blizzard. His suit jacket was gone, his white dress shirt sleeves rolled up to his elbows. His hair was slightly disheveled, and there was a shadow of stubble on his jaw. He looked tired, but his gray eyes were alert, scanning her with that same intensity. Ms. Miller, he said, and his voice was gentler than it had been in the car, though still carrying that underlying steel. How are you feeling? Sarah's voice cracked. Mr. Vance, I don't know how to thank you. You saved our lives. Elias, he corrected, moving further into the room. And you don't need to thank me. I did what anyone should have done. But most people don't. Sarah wiped at her eyes. Most people walked past us for months. You stopped. Something flickered across Elias's face, an emotion Sarah couldn't quite read. Dr. Patterson, would you give us a moment? The doctor nodded and left, closing the door softly behind her. Elias pulled up the chair Dr. Patterson had vacated, sitting down with the kind of controlled grace that spoke of someone always aware of their body, always in command. I need to be direct with you, Sarah. May I call you Sarah? She nodded. Good. Sarah, I've spent the last 4 hours making some calls while you were unconscious. I'm a businessman. It's my nature to research, to understand situations before I act. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I know about your husband's death. I know about his family. I know what they did to you. Sarah felt her face heat with shame. You investigated me? I did what I needed to do to understand how a former nurse with no criminal record and 3 children ends up homeless during the worst winter in Boston history. His voice was matter-of-fact, not judging. And what I found made me angry. Very angry. It was my fault. I should have made sure my name was on. Stop. The word was sharp enough that Sarah flinched. Elias's expression softened slightly. Sorry. But no. What happened to you wasn't your fault. Your husband should have protected you. His family should have had basic human decency. The system should have given you some recourse. None of that happened, and you ended up on the street with 3 children through no fault of your own. Do you understand that? Sarah wanted to argue, wanted to insist she should have been smarter, more careful, less trusting. But the conviction in Elias's voice was stripping away the shame she'd carried for months. I don't know what I'm supposed to do now, she admitted quietly. Even if I can get back on my feet, start over, they destroyed my credit, I have no references anymore, no place to live. Every shelter has a time limit. I'll just end up back where I was. No, Elias said with absolute certainty. You won't. You don't know that. I do, because I'm not going to let that happen. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through something. I own property all over Boston. I have a building in Cambridge, good neighborhood, excellent schools, with furnished apartments I use for visiting executives and consultants. You and your children are going to stay in one of those apartments, rent-free, for as long as you need. Sarah's mouth fell open. I can't, that's too much. You can, and it's not. You'll also need income. He kept scrolling, clinical and efficient. I run a foundation, the Vance Foundation, that focuses on social services, homeless advocacy, and family support programs. We're always looking for people with real-world experience in these areas. You were a nurse, which means you have medical knowledge, administrative skills, and based on what I've seen, you're intelligent and resourceful. I'd like to offer you a position as a program coordinator once you're back on your feet. Good salary, full benefits, health insurance that will cover you and your children. This was too much. It was happening too fast. Sarah felt like she was drowning again, but in kindness instead of despair. Why are you doing this? Elias was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes fixed on hers with an intensity that made her feel like he was weighing how much truth to share. Finally, he said, because I can. Because I have resources that are meaningless if I don't use them to actually help people. Because. He paused, something vulnerable flickering across his features before his mask of control returned. Because I was in my car tonight on my way to a dinner I didn't want to attend, with people I don't particularly like, to close a deal I don't need, and I was thinking about how empty my life felt. Then I saw you, and I saw a chance to actually matter. To actually make a difference. So I took it. The honesty in his words stole Sarah's breath. This wasn't a rich man playing savior for ego or tax deductions. This was something else, something raw and real. There's one more thing, Elias said, his tone shifting to something harder, more dangerous. Your in-laws. The Millers. What they did to you was legal, but it was morally bankrupt. They stole everything from you, your home, your security, your children's inheritance. They did it because they could, because they knew you couldn't fight back. There's nothing I can do about it, Sarah said bitterly. My lawyer said. Your lawyer was a general practitioner you hired for $1,500, Elias interrupted. I employ a team of attorneys who specialize in estate law, contract disputes, and corporate warfare. If you give me permission, I'll have them review your case. If there's any angle, any loophole, any mistake your in-laws made, any pressure point we can exploit, we'll find it. And if there isn't a legal angle, there are other ways to apply pressure. Sarah stared at him. What do you mean? A cold smile touched Elias's lips, the smile of a predator who just spotted prey. Thomas Miller is a commercial real estate developer. His wife Patricia sits on the boards of several charities and social clubs. They care very much about their reputation, their position in society. I have connections. I have influence. And I have a very long memory when it comes to people who harm those under my protection. Under your protection? Sarah echoed. As of tonight, yes. Elias stood, buttoning his cuffs with precise movements. You and your children are under my protection now, Sarah. That means no one touches you, hurts you, or takes advantage of you without answering to me. And I'm not someone people want to answer to when I'm angry. He shouldn't have been intimidating. He should have been her savior, her hero. But there was something about the controlled fury in his voice, the cold calculation in his eyes, that reminded Sarah that men like Elias Vance didn't become billionaires by being soft. They became billionaires by being ruthless when necessary. I don't want revenge, Sarah said carefully. I just want to move forward. And you will. But justice and moving forward aren't mutually exclusive. Elias checked his watch. It's late. You should rest. Dr. Patterson wants to keep you and the children here for at least another day for observation. I'll have someone bring you more comfortable clothes tomorrow and anything else you need. When you're released, Marcus will drive you to your new apartment. We'll get you settled and then we'll talk about next steps. He moved toward the door, then paused and looked back at her. Sarah? You asked me why I'm doing this. The truth is, I'm not entirely sure myself yet. But I do know that when I saw you tonight, trying to shield your children with your own body even though you were dying yourself, I saw something I haven't seen in a long time in my world. What's that? Real strength. Real courage. Not the boardroom kind, where the stakes are just money and ego. The kind that matters. He opened the door. Get some rest. I'll see you tomorrow. Then he was gone, leaving Sarah alone in the quiet luxury of the hospital room with a head full of questions and a heart that was feeling too many things at once: gratitude, confusion, hope, and something else she couldn't quite name but that felt dangerously like the first stirrings of trust. 3 weeks later, Sarah stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of her Cambridge apartment, watching Emma, Sophie, and Jake play in the small courtyard below. They looked like different children, healthy, pink-cheeked, laughing as they built a snowman with the new winter clothes Elias's assistant had delivered. The apartment was beautiful. 2 bedrooms, a modern kitchen, furniture that was actually comfortable. The kids each had beds, toys, clothes that fit. The refrigerator was fully stocked. There were books on the shelves and art on the walls. It felt like a home. It felt like a trap. Not in a bad way, Sarah quickly corrected her own thoughts. Elias had been nothing but respectful, keeping his distance while ensuring they had everything they needed. But the sheer scope of what he'd given them, the debt she could never repay, sat heavy on her chest. Her phone buzzed. A text from Elias. Legal team meeting at my office in 1 hour. Marcus will pick you up. Bring copies of everything you have. Marriage certificate, bank statements, correspondence with the Millers. Sarah's stomach tightened. She'd given Elias permission to review her case, but part of her had assumed nothing would come of it. Her original lawyer had been clear. She had no legal standing. The Millers had been careful. But Elias Vance wasn't her $1,500 lawyer. When Marcus arrived, punctual as always, Sarah settled into the familiar leather interior of the Mercedes and tried to quiet her nerves. The city rolled past, Boston recovering from the blizzard, streets cleared, life returning to normal. What did that even mean anymore? Vance Enterprises occupied the top 15 floors of a sleek glass tower in the financial district. Marcus led her through a lobby that screamed money and power, past security that nodded respectfully when they saw Marcus's badge, up an executive elevator that moved so smoothly Sarah barely felt it. The elevator opened directly into a reception area that could have been featured in an architecture magazine. And there, striding toward her in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, was Elias. "Sarah. Thank you for coming." He shook her hand, brief, professional, and gestured toward a conference room. "My team is assembled. I want to be clear before we go in. What you're about to hear might be overwhelming. Take your time processing it. Ask questions. This is your case, your life. We work at your pace." Sarah nodded, her throat tight. The conference room held 5 people, 3 lawyers, a private investigator, and an accountant. Elias made introductions. The lead attorney was Jennifer Zhao, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who'd apparently built her career destroying inheritance frauds. "Ms. Miller," Jennifer began, pulling up documents on a massive screen. "Mr. Vance asked us to review your case with the full resources of this firm. What we found is illuminating." "I was told there was nothing I could do," Sarah said quietly. "Your previous attorney was correct in his narrow interpretation," Jennifer acknowledged. "Legally, without documentation, you had no direct claim to the estate. However, he missed several critical factors." She pulled up a document. "First, Massachusetts has a constructive trust doctrine. If we can prove that your late husband made verbal promises about your financial security, and that you relied on those promises to your detriment, we can argue for an equitable claim." "But I don't have proof of verbal promises." "Actually, you do." The private investigator, a man named Davies, leaned forward. "We interviewed your neighbors from your old house. 3 of them heard Richard Miller explicitly tell you in public that everything I have is yours and you and the kids are taken care of forever. That's evidence of verbal contract and promise." Sarah's eyes widened. "That's enough." "On its own?" "No," Jennifer said. "But combined with other factors, it builds a case." Second issue, the life insurance policy. Richard's mother was listed as beneficiary from before your marriage. However, Massachusetts law requires that an ex-spouse be removed as a beneficiary upon divorce or remarriage unless explicitly reaffirmed. The policy was never updated to explicitly reaffirm the mother as beneficiary after Richard married you. That's a legal gap. Meaning, Sarah's heart was pounding. Meaning we can challenge the beneficiary designation. Argue that it should default to the spouse, you, because it wasn't properly updated. Jennifer pulled up another document. Third, the house. While Richard never put your name on the deed, we found canceled checks showing you contributed to the mortgage payments regularly. That establishes a financial interest in the property. The accountant, a quiet man named Peters, spoke up. "We also found irregularities in how the estate was handled. Thomas Miller, as executor, moved assets extremely quickly, selling property, closing accounts, without proper notification to potential claimants. That suggests he knew the estate settlement was questionable and wanted to secure everything before challenges could be filed." "Can we prove that?" Elias asked, his voice hard. "We can create enough smoke to make a judge very interested," Peters replied. "There are also tax implications they may not have considered. Large asset transfers have reporting requirements. If Thomas was sloppy..." "He was." Davies slid a folder across the table. "I've spent the last 3 weeks digging into Thomas and Patricia Miller's finances. They're not as wealthy as they appear. Most of their lifestyle is leveraged, mortgages, loans, credit. Richard's estate, what they took from you, wasn't just greed. They needed it. Thomas has some bad investments that are about to come due." Sarah felt dizzy. "So what does this mean?" Jennifer looked at Elias, who nodded. She turned back to Sarah. "It means we have enough to file a credible lawsuit. We challenge the estate settlement, the life insurance beneficiary, and request a forensic audit of the executor's handling of assets. We also file an injunction to freeze any remaining estate assets until the case is resolved." "How long would that take?" "Normally, years." Jennifer's expression turned predatory. "But we're not going to play normally. We're going to file everything at once, make it very public, very messy, very expensive for them to fight. Thomas and Patricia care about their reputation. Once the legal pressure starts, once their friends and business associates start asking questions, once the media gets interested. She shrugged. People like the Millers tend to settle rather than endure prolonged exposure. You're going to blackmail them, Sarah said flatly. No, Elias corrected. We're going to give them a choice. Settle fairly with you, returning what they stole, or fight us in court and watch their reputation burn while we expose every questionable decision they've made. That's not blackmail. That's consequences. Sarah looked around the table at these people, these expensive, powerful people, all focused on her problem, her life. How much is this going to cost? Don't worry about that, Elias said. That's not an answer. Hundreds of thousands, he said bluntly. Maybe more, depending on how hard they fight. And you're not paying for it. Consider it an investment in justice. Elias, I can't let you. You can't stop me. His gray eyes locked on hers. Sarah, I told you that you were under my protection. I meant it. These people took everything from you because they could, because you were vulnerable. I'm making you not vulnerable anymore. Let me do this. There was something in his voice, not pity, not charity, but something fiercer, almost possessive. It should have scared her, but instead it made her feel safe in a way she hadn't felt since before Richard died. Okay, she whispered. Good. Elias nodded to Jennifer. File everything. I want this moving within 48 hours. The meeting continued, the legal team laying out strategy, timelines, and potential outcomes. Sarah listened, her head spinning, trying to understand how her life had gone from freezing to death on a sidewalk to sitting in a boardroom with a billionaire's legal team waging war on her behalf. When the meeting finally ended and the team filed out, Elias walked Sarah to the elevator. They stood in silence for a moment, the city spread out beneath them through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Why are you really doing this? Sarah asked quietly. And don't tell me it's just about having resources or making a difference. There's something else. Elias was quiet for so long that Sarah thought he might not answer. Then he said, My father died when I was 12. Heart attack, sudden, no warning. My mother remarried within a year, a man who saw my father's company as his ticket to wealth. He slowly squeezed her out of everything, isolated her from friends and family, made her dependent on him. By the time I was old enough to help, she was a shell of who she'd been. She died when I was 23, sad and alone and convinced she was worthless. Sarah's breath caught. Elias. I built this company, he continued, his voice low and intense, to have the power to prevent what happened to her from happening to anyone else in my orbit. But I got so focused on building, on accumulating power and wealth, that I forgot to actually use it for anything that mattered. Then I saw you in that blizzard, sacrificing yourself for your children, and I saw my mother, what she could have been, should have been, if someone had given her a chance. And I decided that this time, I wasn't going to be too late. Without thinking, Sarah reached out and took his hand. He looked down at their joined hands, surprised, then back at her face. Thank you, she said. Not just for the apartment or the legal help. For seeing me. For seeing us. Something shifted in Elias's expression, the controlled mask slipping to reveal something raw and uncertain beneath. Sarah, I need to be honest with you about something. What? This stopped being just charity about a week ago. His thumb brushed across her knuckles, tentative. When I visit the apartment to check on you and the kids, I'm not just doing it out of responsibility. I enjoy it. I look forward to it. Your children are amazing, Emma's curiosity, Sophie's laughter, Jake's fearlessness. And you. He paused. You're stronger than anyone I've ever met. Smarter. More resilient. And I find myself thinking about you at inappropriate times during board meetings. Sarah's heart was racing. Elias. I'm not telling you this to pressure you, he said quickly. You're not obligated to feel anything beyond gratitude. I just needed you to know that my motivations aren't entirely altruistic anymore. If that makes you uncomfortable, I can step back, assign someone else to. It doesn't make me uncomfortable, Sarah interrupted. It scares me a little, because I haven't thought about anyone this way since Richard, and I don't know if I'm ready, but it doesn't make me uncomfortable. Elias's eyes searched hers. So what does it make you feel? Sarah thought about the way her pulse jumped when Elias walked into a room. The way his intensity made her feel alive in a way she'd forgotten she could feel. The way his presence had become something she craved, not just for the security he provided but for the man he was beneath the suits and power. Hopeful, she admitted. Terrified, but hopeful. The elevator dinged, arriving. Elias stepped closer, his free hand coming up to cup her cheek gently. I can work with hopeful. And I'm patient. We'll take this as slow as you need. Then he kissed her forehead, gentle, chaste, full of promise, and stepped back as the elevator doors opened. Marcus will take you home. I'll call you tonight with updates from Jennifer. And Sarah? His smile was softer than she'd ever seen it. Thank you for being brave enough to be honest with me. As the elevator descended, Sarah touched her forehead where his lips had been and allowed herself to feel something she'd thought was gone forever, the possibility of happiness. The settlement came through 3 months later. Sarah sat in Jennifer Zhao's office, staring at the number on the document in front of her. It wasn't everything the Millers had taken. Thomas and Patricia weren't going to give back the house or the full value of Richard's estate, but it was enough. More than enough. $750,000. They folded faster than I expected, Jennifer said, satisfaction evident in her voice. Once we filed the injunction and the media started asking questions, Thomas's business partners got nervous. Turns out, several of his major investors were already skittish about his financial management. Our lawsuit was the excuse they needed to pull out. Is he going to be okay? Sarah asked, surprising herself. Jennifer raised an eyebrow. You're concerned about the man who left you homeless? I'm concerned about becoming the kind of person who enjoys others' suffering, Sarah clarified. Even people who hurt me. That's remarkably gracious of you. Jennifer slid the settlement agreement across the desk. Thomas and Patricia are going to be fine. Diminished, but fine. They'll have to sell some property, downsize their lifestyle. But they're not destitute. Sarah signed the document, her hands steady. It felt surreal. Months ago, she'd been freezing to death, and now she was signing papers that made her financially secure for the first time in her life. When she left Jennifer's office, Elias was waiting in the lobby. Over the past 3 months, they'd fallen into a rhythm. Dinners twice a week, weekends with the kids, slow and careful and real. He'd never pushed, never demanded more than she was ready to give. But the connection between them had deepened, grown into something neither of them could deny. How'd it go? He asked, falling into step beside her. I'm officially a woman of means, Sarah said, still processing. It doesn't feel real. It's real. What are you going to do with it? Sarah had been thinking about this. Put half into trust funds for the kids' education and future. Use part of the rest as a down payment on a house, something that's actually ours, in my name, that no one can take. And the remainder. She looked at him. I want to donate it to your foundation. For programs that help families like mine. Elias stopped walking, turning to face her fully. Sarah, that's your security. Your future. I have security now. I have a job I love, a salary that supports us, health insurance, savings. The money is extra, and I can't think of a better use for it than helping other people who are where I was. She reached for his hand. You gave me back my life. Let me pay it forward. Something profound shifted in Elias's expression, pride, admiration, and something deeper that made Sarah's breath catch. Marry me, he said. Sarah's world tilted. What? Marry me, he repeated, his voice steady despite the enormous ask. I know it's fast. I know you might not be ready. But I've spent 3 months falling in love with you. With your strength, your kindness, your children, the life we've been building together. I don't want to wait anymore. I don't want to be careful. I want to make this permanent. I want to be Emma, Sophie, and Jake's father. I want to wake up next to you every morning. I want to build a family with you, a real family, the kind I never had. Tears were streaming down Sarah's face. Elias. If it's too soon, I understand. I'll wait. I'll wait as long as you need. But I needed you to know that this isn't casual for me. You're not a charity case or a project or a phase. You're the woman I love, and I want forever. Sarah thought about the past 3 months, watching Elias teach Jake to build with blocks, seeing his face light up when Emma showed him her drawings, hearing his laughter when Sophie told terrible knock-knock jokes. She thought about the late-night conversations about everything and nothing, the way he listened to her like her words mattered, the way he'd never tried to fix her but instead gave her the tools to fix herself. She thought about how he'd saved her life, not just physically but in every way that mattered. Yes, she said. Elias blinked. Yes. Yes, I'll marry you. Because you're right, this isn't casual and I don't want to be careful either. I want the life we've been building. I want you to be their father. I want forever too. Elias pulled her close, kissing her with the kind of desperate relief that comes from wanting something so badly you're afraid to hope for it. Around them, people in the building lobby stopped and stared, but neither of them cared. When they finally pulled apart, Elias was smiling, really smiling, the kind of open joy Sarah had only seen glimpses of before. I don't have a ring yet. I was planning to wait, do this properly. I don't need proper. I just need you. They picked up the kids from school together that afternoon, and when they were all settled in the apartment, Elias knelt down to their level. I have something important to ask you three, he said seriously. I've asked your mom to marry me and she said yes. But that means I'd be your dad, not replacing your first dad, but being a dad who's here now. Is that okay with you? Emma, 7 years old and wise beyond her years, looked at him solemnly. Would we be a real family? The realest kind, Elias promised. And you won't leave? Sophie asked, her 5-year-old voice wavering. Never. I'm here for keeps. Jake, who'd bonded with Elias so completely over the past months that he already called him Eli, just climbed into his lap and hugged him. Love you, the 3-year-old mumbled into Elias's shoulder. I love you too, buddy. All of you. Emma and Sophie exchanged a look, then nodded. Okay, Emma said. You can be our dad. The wedding happened 6 weeks later, small, intimate, perfect. They held it in the garden of Elias's estate, with just close friends and colleagues. Sarah wore a simple cream dress, and the kids were part of the ceremony, standing with them as they exchanged vows. I, Elias, take you, Sarah, to be my wife, Elias said, his voice strong and sure. I promise to honor the strength that kept you fighting when you had every reason to give up. I promise to protect you and your children, our children, with everything I have. I promise to build a life with you that's worthy of what we've overcome. I promise to never forget that the greatest success of my life wasn't building a company. It was stopping my car on a snowy night and having the courage to look at you. To really see you. Sarah was crying, but she smiled through the tears. I, Sarah, take you, Elias, to be my husband. I promise to remind you every day that wealth isn't measured in dollars but in laughter and love and the small moments that make life beautiful. I promise to let you in, even when it's scary, even when I'm afraid. I promise to build a family with you that's based on kindness and second chances and the belief that it's never too late to become who you were meant to be. I promise to never forget that you saved my life, but more than that, you gave me a reason to want to live it fully. When they kissed, Emma, Sophie, and Jake cheered, and for the first time in her life, Sarah felt completely, utterly safe. Sarah stood in the kitchen of their new home, the house she'd bought with part of the settlement, with her name on every document, and watched through the window as Elias chased Emma, Sophie, and Jake through the backyard. They were screaming with laughter, and Elias was making ridiculous monster noises that had them running in delighted circles. The Vance Foundation had just announced its new Family Restoration Initiative, a program Sarah had designed from the ground up to help homeless families transition back to stability. It was fully funded, staffed with people who'd lived through homelessness themselves, and already helping its first dozen families. Sarah's old in-laws had faded into the background, not gone, but irrelevant. They existed somewhere in Boston, living smaller lives, and Sarah found she didn't think about them much anymore. The anger had faded, replaced by something better, indifference born from happiness. Her phone buzzed. A text from Jennifer. Just got word, Family Restoration Initiative was featured in the Globe. They're calling it a model for the nation. Sarah smiled. A year ago, she'd been invisible. Now, she was changing systems. The back door burst open, and Jake ran in, Elias close behind. Mama, we saw a rabbit. A real one. Did you? Sarah scooped him up, kissing his cheek. He was healthy now, thriving, with none of the haunted look he'd had during those months on the streets. Elias wrapped his arms around both of them, Emma and Sophie joining the group hug. Family pile, Emma declared, and they all laughed. Later, after the kids were in bed, Sarah and Elias sat on their back porch, watching the stars. Elias's arm was around her shoulders, and Sarah leaned into his warmth, a warmth that was now familiar, cherished, home. Do you ever think about that night? Sarah asked. In the blizzard? Every day, Elias admitted. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Marcus hadn't pointed you out, if I'd been too focused on my phone to look up, if I'd decided to just call 911 instead of stopping. But you did stop. I did. And it changed everything. He pressed a kiss to her temple. Best decision I ever made. Sarah thought about the journey, from despair to hope, from invisible to seen, from broken to whole. She thought about the strength she'd found in herself, the justice she'd fought for, the love she'd allowed herself to accept. 4 words, she murmured. What? In the blizzard, you said 4 words to me, come with me. And I did. And it saved my life. Elias pulled her closer. You saved mine too. I just didn't know I needed saving until I met you. They sat in comfortable silence, 2 people who'd found each other in the worst moment and built something beautiful from the ashes of tragedy. The world had tried to destroy Sarah Miller, had pushed her to the very edge of existence. But she'd survived. She'd fought. She'd rebuilt. And in the end, she'd found something more valuable than houses or bank accounts or vindication. She'd found home. What would you have done if you were Sarah in that blizzard? Would you have trusted a stranger who appeared out of nowhere, or would fear have kept you frozen in place? This story isn't just about a rescue, it's about what happens when someone with power decides to use it for something that actually matters. It's about the cruelty of people who should have protected a grieving widow, and the courage of a woman who refused to let them define her worth. This story makes your blood boil, doesn't it? The thought of Richard's family stealing everything, leaving Sarah and 3 innocent children to freeze on the streets while they lived in luxury. But it also restores your faith because it proves that sometimes, not always, but sometimes, justice can prevail. That sometimes the right person comes along at exactly the right moment, and one decisive act can rewrite an entire life. If this story moved you, if it made you angry at the injustice or hopeful about the ending, I need you to do something right now. Hit that like button, smash it, because it tells me you want more stories about people who stand up, fight back, and refuse to let cruelty win. Drop a comment below saying, "Justice served," if you're glad Elias made the Millers pay for what they did. Tell me what you would have done in Sarah's position, or share if you've ever felt invisible and someone finally saw you. And here's the thing, if you don't subscribe and hit that notification bell right now, you're going to miss the next story. Because I've got more coming, stories about people who were counted out, written off, left for dead, and came back stronger. Stories about the moment everything changes, about unlikely heroes and the villains who underestimate them. Stories that will make you feel something real. This isn't just entertainment. This is about building a community of people who believe in second chances, who fight for justice, who refuse to look away when someone needs help. Every like, every comment, every share tells me you're part of that community. That you're someone who stops the car instead of driving past. So what are you waiting for? Like this video. Comment, "Justice served," or share your own story of survival and second chances. Subscribe and hit that bell so you never miss another story that matters. Because the next one might be even more powerful than this, and you don't want to miss it. Join me. Let's build something that matters, one story at a time.